Hey guys, it's the Friction here, Tiger Tank 12. Having to call me, I don't really care. Welcome back. Very quick intro. We are right now on Tanks or Tomato GG, and we are looking at some of the worst tier 8 vehicles in the tech tree. Now, this is a little series that was inspired by the comments of a viewer a couple of months ago where he thought it would be very interesting to see what it would be like to try out all of the worst rated tanks. And by worst rated, I would definitely go after win rate because, as you can see, there are still quite a lot of players who play these vehicles, but they have pretty horrendous win rates. These are the worst rated tier 8 vehicles in the game, and today we're starting with the Pershing. We're not immediately starting with the VK, but we're starting with the Pershing because it's one of the vehicles I have played a lot of and a lot of games with, and I have in my garage right now. So this is a little series I want to do before I finish my World of Tanks journey in March, and I thought it would be kind of funny to see because everyone is kind of always looking for the best vehicles. What if we go down the rabbit hole and we look at some of the worst ones? And I want to just give you guys a little bit of a perspective here. If we switch on over to premium at tier 8 and we look at the worst rated tier 8 premiums, you can see a lot of these premiums I actually have played a lot of games in, and most of them are actually medium tanks. So that's pretty fascinating. But if we do compare just the worst rated tier 8 vehicles in the game, sadly, a majority of them are standard vehicles. And to be fair, the standard tanks, the tech tree tanks, almost always have worse win rates than the premium vehicles. And that, I think, doesn't need a lot of explaining. It's pretty obvious why that is. It's because these premium tanks are just most of the time better than their tech tree counterparts, and the ones that aren't better than their tech tree counterparts and that are just as bad in terms of win rate are the older premium vehicles that used to be at least equal or worse than the tech tree counterparts, as you can see right here: Kanoniak, Panzer 58, the Primo Victoria, the M46 Korea, the STRV 81. All of these premium vehicles, they're not super new. But until then, you know, if you go down, the other ones, they end up coming later. What is really interesting is that the M47 improved, which is the improved Patton, right? The improved Pershing. No, the improved Patton, yeah. Actually sitting fairly high with 46.67%, which is kind of interesting to see. Either way, let's jump on over to the Pershing and talk a little bit about that vehicle. Let's take a quick look at the characteristics of the M26 Pershing and why this tank struggles so much in the current matchmaker, and why I think Wargaming needs to seriously change some parameters on this tank to make it a viable choice at tier 8 again, and to allow players to actually enjoy the American medium tank line. Now, I'm very biased when it comes to the American medium tank line because I really enjoyed the M46, I really enjoyed the M48 Patton, but this line is probably not the best medium tank line in the game. It probably doesn't even come close to that. The M26 Pershing is one of the weakest medium tanks you meet in World of Tanks at tier 8, and there are several factors for that. One of the key factors is the lack of penetration. You have AP rounds and APCR rounds, and it just shows you how antique this tank is, because this is a very old school way of kind of balancing a vehicle. The AP rounds only sport 190 millimeters of penetration, while the APCR rounds sport a whopping 268 millimeters of pen. So that's an increase of 78 millimeters penetration, almost 80 millimeters more pen with the APCR round than the AP round. So the choice is very easy. A lot of players who have the resources will just be firing APCR. Why would you even spend time on the AP shells when 190 millimeters is not going to get you anywhere in tier 9, tier 8, and even, of course, tier 10. So, it's just not just the fact that the average pen is bad. No, the average damage is also pretty bad. You have very bad alpha damage, you have very bad pen, you do have great gun depression angles, which does give you the ability to peek over ridgelines and to shoot at tanks that are below you. But the issue is also that your gun characteristics, your stats, the aim time, dispersion values. Now, this is with very good crew and premium consumables, are actually pretty bad compared to the fact that you already have very bad average damage and bad average penetration. So you're looking at a gun that is not very reliable, a tank that is supposed to be reliable at range, but does miss a lot of shots at range and is really, really weird. I've played a few games now again after I unlocked this tank again, and I have noticed that when you're sniping with this tank, if you're not fully aimed in, the shots go all over the place, and even when you're fully aimed in, there is no guarantee that you're going to get a clean hit. A lot of times the rounds fall short. I'm not sure if I'm aiming it badly, but I just remember when I played with the M46 Patton, the tank just feels a lot better. Now, is it really that bad? Am I just over-exaggerating the fact that the M26 Pershing is bad? Am I just kind of not the best player? I would say we can compare it real quick to the Indian Panzer in certain categories, and then we can talk about the fact that the M26 Pershing is bad. Now, the Indian Panzer is by no means seen as a very powerful vehicle, but it is very similar to the M26 Pershing in several regards. It's a sniper medium tank. It has a gun that is, fairly okay, but it also doesn't have a lot of alpha damage. 250, that's 10 alpha damage more than the Pershing. 218 millimeters of penetration, that's about 20 millimeters of more penetration than actually almost 30 millimeters of more penetration that you have with the AP rounds. You still have a very good APCR round. The shell velocity is also better on the AP, on the Indian Panzer. You have a better rate of fire, you have better aim time, better dispersion values. Without any crew, without any equipment on this vehicle, you have better DPM, and you can immediately see that this tank, with everything, with cola, with a rammer, with a crew that is 100%, just barely gets the same DPM as the Indian Panzer that is coming around without any crew. And the Indian Panzer is not considered to be a great tank. It is a fun tank, but it's certainly not a great tank. So from the firepower tab alone, you can see how ridiculously underpowered this thing is in the year 2023. Okay, I have to mute my phone because I'm getting texts, and somehow I unmuted my phone because I think I was expecting a phone call. Survivability-wise, this tank is certainly better than the Indian Panzer. It has more armor, 102 at the front of the hull, 127 on the turret. But if you look at the Indian, it's not that far off, 90 and 90. And at the same time, you're not going to be bouncing a lot of rounds on your turret with those 127 millimeters of armor. So it's another issue. The armor is there, but it's not good enough. Now, with the added armor that you have on this vehicle, the vehicle is quite heavy. You can see the top speed with turbo is 53 kph. Specific power to weight ratio with turbo is at 18.38. That is okay, you can work with that. But at the same time, if you compare it once again to the Indian Panzer, this vehicle gets 55 kph just out of the standard composition without any equipment, and the specific power to weight ratio is kind of similar. So if we would be using turbo on this vehicle, it would be much better than the M26. So the M26 is not just kind of sluggish. No, its gun is also not that great. You don't have the best DPM. You don't have the pen to work, to snipe vehicles from longer distances unless you use premium ammunition. Your survivability is not great enough for you to be fighting close quarter, which pretty much ends up with a vehicle that is not very good at anything. So, what would be my thought process with the M26 Pershing? How would I fix this? I would improve the alpha damage. Increase it to 280. Improve the average penetration to the same level as the Indian Panzer, to 220, 218. Improve the rate of fire a little bit. Look that the dispersion values are, toned down so that the vehicle is actually a good sniper now. Then I would also improve the mobility by a little bit, increase the specific power to weight ratio, and maybe give it 2 kph more so that it's at 50 kph top speed instead of 48. And also, you could add 10 meters more view range because the American medium tanks already have very good view range. And if you give it 10 meters more view range with 410 meters, it would be an exceptionally good tank at longer distances and being able to spot enemies. That would give this vehicle the choice of being a much more flexible tank and a lot more enjoyable, because right now it's in a place where it just doesn't feel like it is able to fight very effectively, and when it's in a fight it is completely reliant on premium shells. But I think I've said enough. We're gonna jump into some gameplays and I'm just gonna show you guys how bad this tank really feels when you are playing it in the current form it is in. Okay, so I have two gameplays prepared for you guys. The first one is in a tier 10 matchup against an IS-7, a Leopard 2, the new Japanese tier 10 tank destroyer, and a couple of tier 9s. This is a perfect example for this tank in its environment, where it actually can utilize its view range, where it can utilize its sniping ability, but it also shows off the very clear restrictions you have on this tank. Like, you can see that the module damage that you do with your AP rounds, they're just not, it's not very good. You barely are able to track anything at this tier, and it's really annoying because we actually had a very nice shot on the Centurion 7/1 and we only critically hit the tracks. We did not break the tracks, and thus we did not get any assistance damage whenever somebody did hit him during that time while we actually shot his tracks. That is one thing you have to kind of get used to. Another thing is also that it's actually not the best sniper out of all of the tier 8 vehicles. Now, sadly, the sniping ability of this vehicle is decent, but it's still very, very old school. It's just like the day this vehicle was brought out and wasn't touched since it was released into the game. I think the tank was maybe buffed a little bit, but it still kind of feels sluggish whenever you're shooting at targets far away. Another very big downside to the tank itself is it's incredibly poorly protected, and you're gonna have a lot of tier 9, tier 10 matches where everything is just gonna cut right through your armor. Even if you're hull down and you're only peeking out with your turret visible, people will still be able to actually penetrate those cheeks fairly easily, and there's not a lot of things you can do about it. So one key feature I would definitely recommend for you guys is to stay away from the fighting. Only go and fight if it's absolutely necessary, and if you have some support, try to keep the enemies at a distance. Even though the gun is supposed to be similar or the same to the T26E4, no, the E1, sorry, it's the Super Pershing, it really does not perform up to par, and you'll see that in just a second. Right here we have an APCR shell loaded, and we still are unable to penetrate the side of a K91 PT. Maybe the shot wasn't the best, maybe it was just the angling at that moment in time, but at least we're still able to do some damage to the Scorpion G. Firing premium ammunition or firing the secondary ammo is something you kind of have to get used to when you're playing this tank. You also have to get used to the fact that people will actually not be bouncing your vehicle. You can see the E50 went right through the upper plate, and that Leopard 1 also did just penetrate some other part of our vehicle. But it's fairly easily penned, and tier 8 vehicles will not hold at that either. So basically you end up with a tank that doesn't snipe all that well. It snipes okay. The alpha damage isn't great. Your shell velocity isn't great. Your penetration is pretty terrible. And you do have decent view range, but you don't have enough camo rating to make this a stealthy medium tank. And you're also not fast enough to get into positions where you can, you know, maybe be a light scout, or not a light scout, but a heavier kind of scout. So you're kind of reliant on the premium ammunition to get yourself the damage in these games. Now, I think what pretty much sums it up is the fact that to get 3 marks of excellence on this tank, you only need to do a combined 2000 damage per game. The second game I've prepared for you guys is in a tier 8 matchup where we are only going up against vehicles of the same tier, and it should be the perfect place for the Pershing. Sadly though, the Pershing is not that well versed against anything that is not a tier 6 or tier 7 vehicle. I've noticed that the Pershing should probably be a tier 7 and that they need to overhaul this tank in some way, shape or form to make it more adapt and to make it much more enjoyable at tier 8. Right now it's very difficult to play. It almost doesn't really have a place in the game. You only can play this tank effectively, in my opinion, when you play it to its strengths, and that means you have to keep away from the enemy. Sometimes the gun does work in your favor, and that's something you can see right now. When you do have these shots into targets that show their sides, that are very lightly armored, sometimes the rounds do work. But as soon as you see something like a 703, which is, to be fair, a very difficult tank to penetrate with any tank, even tier 9s and tier 10s, you probably should be loading the gold shells. Now, the premium shells are one of the few good things about the Pershing. 268 millimeters of penetration, that will actually guarantee you almost always a penetration against a tier 8 vehicle. Unless you're fighting against some Soviet heavies or against some other super heavy vehicles that are in a hull down position, you're going to be able to penetrate most of the vehicles. Now, right here you can see we're trying to double bush this, and we're trying to use the bush to our advantage. And still somehow, even at 279 meters, which is fairly close for sniping, purposes, the tank still does miss every once in a while, and it does miss like fairly frequently, and it's one of the most annoying things. The gun is not reliable, and the gun not being reliable is the worst thing in my humble opinion, in my experience as well. I dislike tanks that do not have reliable guns but have like massive amounts of armor or are really fast. But if you do not have a reliable gun, you are kind of super annoying to play, really frustrating, and that's exactly what the Pershing is right now. Now, at distance, on open maps where the enemy is also not pushing very aggressively, where you do have some time to, reorganize, to fall back, maybe to get into a position where you are behind cover and you can utilize your 10 degrees of gun depression, which is also another very nice addition for the vehicle. That's where the Pershing does feel the best. Right here you can see this tier 8 Soviet heavy tank is doing something that I would not have expected. He's just pushing straight forward, doesn't really care about the tank shooting him, and because we are behind several layers of foliage, he's not able to spot us. And that's the place where this vehicle does do fairly well, when it's hidden and when it has the ability to shoot at targets that are not all too far away, and that you can just kind of fire at without having to think too much about the weak spots, even though I was using the 268 millimeters of penetration with the AP round. As soon as you do get spotted, and as soon as people are able to see you, they are going to be able to penetrate you with pretty easy, with a lot of ease. It's not very difficult to get through the Pershing, and you can see right there the Scorpion just kind of taught us a lesson there, not to get over the hill. That is something you kind of have to learn when you're playing this thing. It also means you have to be extremely cautious about your moves. Now, in any other vehicle with a little bit of turret armor and with a little bit of gun depression, I would have started challenging the Burask Anti-Skoda T27 a little bit further forward and with a lot more conviction than with the Pershing, because the alpha damage also kind of isn't really that much of an argument that these guys are not going to peek. If I have to peek a Burask and I'm coming around the corner with my 90mm gun where he knows I'm only going to be doing 200 230 to maybe 300 damage, I'm going to eat like 2 shells for 700 to 800 damage. So I know nobody has any respect for my vehicle, nobody has any respect for my alpha damage. So it makes it even harder, and it makes it so that you are not going to be able to really put on pressure on a lot of vehicles, because players will know it's a Pershing. They're not scared of a Pershing, and they're not going to let themselves get bullied. They're not going to make mistakes. That doesn't mean that you cannot have a moment where you can, put a shell or maybe 2 or maybe 3 into the enemy and still do a little bit of accumulated damage. But at the same time, since your turret armor is not that great, your hull armor is not that great, every single time you move forward, you expose yourself, you become a very easy target. So the issue is just that the Pershing kind of combines all of the bad things, doesn't really have any arguments for itself, and you're kind of stuck with a tank that you cannot really utilize in a way that is effective and where you can be of assistance to your team. And you can see the Lorraine 40T and the T26 over there. Once they do get the side of you and once they are able to track you, you're a very easy target, very quickly disposed of. And as you can see right there, we got knocked out, but we still did above 2,000 damage. Now, that is one of the things that I have to reiterate. I'm not a bad player. I'm not the best player in the world. I've played over 500 games in the Pershing, but the Pershing has not changed ever since it was introduced into World of Tanks. And this tank still remains the same as it has been almost 10 years ago. And the issue is just, over 10 years ago, sorry about that. The issue is just that getting more than 2,000 damage is incredibly difficult in a game that is so fast-paced nowadays, where you're barely getting in like 2, let's say 3 to 5 shots when you're getting flanked by something. And when you bounce these shots, because you only have 190 millimeters of penetration, it becomes double frustrating. So, without further ado, I'd say we go into one final game where I can show you guys just how ridiculously bad it can be, and where we can talk a little bit about the idea that I have, how Wargaming could make this tank a more viable option and make it a better pick for the future. So, this game we are on the new map, Oyster Bay, and I know it's not very fair to expect the Pershing to be performing in a tier 9 matchup, because we're going up against vehicles that are fairly dangerous, such as the Leopard prototype, such as the T-54, or all 3 of those tank destroyers. But still, you're expecting at least to be able to fight back. And in this gameplay, I want to show you guys just how ridiculously difficult it is to fight back with this thing, and how annoying it is to actually be playing this tank. And it will start immediately at the beginning of this match. This shot, very lucky, RNG is on our side. We didn't fully aim in, and we still managed to hit him while he was fully on the move with top speed. But look at what happens next. It's a tier 9 French light tank. We bounce his bloody tracks, and that's just something that happens over and over again with this 90mm gun. And it is incredibly annoying and frustrating when it happens. Okay, that shot was not very good. Not a very well placed shot, so I can obviously understand that that one didn't manage to do any damage. That one might have done some damage to the ELC even 90, but I'm not entirely sure. But right here, we are in a position where we're just trying to snipe tanks. We're using the range to our advantage, and we're just hoping for some targets that we can shoot while we are still in cover. But as you can see, the Leopard Prototype A does have some other plans for us, and there's also going to be another heavy tank coming in any moment now. It's a 703 once again, and he's in a very dangerous position, so we are not going to be able to really do anything about him unless he shows us his side. Even with premium rounds, that's how good that tank is. And yeah, I realize that this is not a place where I want to stick around, because I know that this Bourrasque is going to run. This object 416 is in a position where he basically cannot get away, and I know that this RHM Borsig is going to be an easy target once everyone here gets lined up and lit up. by the Leopard Prototype A and the Indian Panzer and the 703 once they come around the corner. So that's why I decide to fall back, because I know that this is not going to end very well. We do get another lucky shot at the ELC even 90 right through the plane, and that was, I think, I'm not even sure if it was an APCR round or an AP round, but we still managed to do some damage to that ELC even 90. And finally, we get the Char MLE, get one of those super annoying tier 9 light tanks out of the way, and, you know, just secure our flank here a little bit. You can see, unfortunately for us, the enemy team is now pushing the Leopard Prototype A, the Indian, and the 703. They have all just completely destroyed the Burasque. And the issue is just we weren't really able to help them at all. We wouldn't have been able to assist that Burasque at all, while we actually missed the ELC even 90 right there. This is a very unfortunate situation, because now you have to run away, and the Pershing is just not fast enough for running. You have to be extremely cautious, because as soon as you're going to be running away, people will target you. And a Pershing is a very nice little snack to have on the go. So right here, you can see our team is slowly but surely getting eaten up by these two guys. The Object 416 actually manages to get away from there. And now it's all about utilizing our view range and hopefully these bushes there effectively, so that we can actually fight against these guys while they're coming in and closing the advance around our cap. There's a bloody fly going about my my setup, and it's really annoying. So one strength this tank has is its view range. 400 meter space view range on a tier 8 medium tank is really great, but it's one of the few things next to the 268 millimeters of premium round penetration. So what would I do with this tank if I had the ability to actually buff or nerf things? Well, the first thing I would do is I would actually improve the alpha damage on the gun. This gun is not very reliable, and this gun needs to have at least 280 alpha damage. You can see how quickly we just lost all of our HP to that ELC even 90 Leopard Prototype A and that double shot by the 703. And we only bounced the ELC even 90 because we got lucky and he fired at our hull while we were angling the tank a little bit, so we got very lucky there. Improve the alpha damage on the gun. I would improve the penetration to at least 220 millimeters with the standard AP rounds. I would improve the shell velocity of the AP round to 1,050 meters per second shell velocity. And then I would also improve the mobility, give it a little bit more horsepower to ton ratio so that it accelerates faster, and give it the additional 2 kph that it lacks right now, because at the moment it's at 48 kph, and I think it's a tank that should be at least in the 50 kph range. This fly is bloody annoying, I can tell you guys that much. As soon as I have finished this video, I'm gonna chase this fly out of my building. Yeah, and finally I would improve the view range to 410 meters, which would really offset this tank. And make it a very special sniper tank that is able to hit tanks reliably, and that is also able to spot for itself effectively. And hopefully these changes are considered by Wargaming, or at least that they're thinking about changing the Pershing in the near future, because it is incredibly underwhelming to play right now. It's almost no fun. It's super annoying and frustrating to play this vehicle, but at the same time it is a tank that I really enjoyed back in the days, and it's just sad that it has stayed stuck in the time that it was once released in. And this game has developed very rapidly, and this game has changed completely, and I think this is one of the tanks that needs to be fixed and addressed, because it leads to an M48, which is great. It leads to an M46 that also needs a few things that need to be improved. I think the standard pan should be increased. And the line itself is a lot of fun if you give it a chance, but the M26 Pershing is so outdated, nobody will enjoy this tank. even big fans, and that's where I stand. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. As always, comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Until then, have a good one.